You're lying still now, with the lights dimmed low, your breath softening into the rhythm of night. Outside your window, the earth turns silently under a quilt of stars. And somewhere beneath you, just a few meters down, begins a history deeper and older than any memory, any map, any name. Tonight, we're not chasing dreams forward, but drifting backward. Not upward into space, but downward through time. Imagine you could sink into the earth like a single flake of snow, not melting but drifting gently through layers of soil and stone, each centimeter a century, each meter a millennia, down through roots that remember old forests, down through beds of ancient rivers now turned to stone, past the bones of creatures who never had names, past ash from fires that no longer burn, deeper still into a silence that remembers more than it reveals. The earth beneath us is not empty. It is thick with memory, but not memory like a book, clear and preserved. It is memory like a dream you half recall upon waking, soft around the edges, full of feeling but light on detail. The ground holds its stories in minerals and pressure, in the alignment of crystals, in the strange tilt of one layer against another. We live on the surface of a mind too slow to speak in our lifetimes, and so we often forget how little of our story is recorded in the earth. Human history, the cities, the science, the wars, the art, all of it fits in the tiniest thread at the very top of the geological fabric. If Earth's timeline were a 24-hour day, modern humans arrive in the final second before midnight. All our satellites, our towers, our internet in the final blink. And yet, here we are, walking on a stage billions of years old, convinced we are its opening act. But what if we're not? What if we're just the most recent layer in a much older performance? What if long before pyramids or pottery, before the first wheel or the first word, something else lived here and left, or vanished, or was buried so deeply that even the deepest digger missed it? Not aliens, not myths, just another version of civilization, one born of the same earth, one that rose quietly and fell even quieter. If you lie still and listen, not with your ears, but with your imagination, you might begin to hear it, the faintest whisper beneath the soil. Not a voice, not a language, but a question. Could someone have walked this path before us and left no footprints behind? To ask this is not to chase fantasy, but to acknowledge the humility science sometimes asks of us. We are used to seeing Earth as ours, and time as short. But Earth has had time for many stories, stories that might not end in disaster, but in dissolution, gentle erasure by wind, by rain, by the slow grinding of stone. You might wonder, if someone had lived here long ago, where are the cities, the machines, the lights? But imagine if they were built from different materials, guided by different energies. Suppose their cities were made of living wood that crumbled back to forest, or built into glaciers that melted into the sea. Suppose their tools left no rust, no plastic, no scar on the land. Suppose they did not reach for the stars, but only circled their own biosphere, content in a balance we barely understand. If such a people existed, they would not be remembered in monuments, but in the slight irregularities of rock, in the inexplicable patterns of mineral deposits, in the silence between fossil layers. And even those signs would fade, not because they weren't real, but because time is a patient eraser. Tonight, as you drift further into stillness, picture the earth not as a solid ball of rock, but as a slow wave, folding over itself again and again. With every earthquake, every volcanic breath, every inch of shifting plate, it folds another story inward, buries it, presses it flat, turns it into something else. Not lost, just translated into a language only time can read. And as you lie there, think of how thin the crust beneath us really is, how even the oldest mountains are young in Earth's terms. Think of all that lies below, unseen not because it is far, but because it is forgotten. Covered not by conspiracy or catastrophe, but by time's natural hush. A hush as soft as this night. You are part of this story too. Your breath rises and falls in rhythm with the atmosphere. Your body made of minerals once forged in stars, shaped by ancient seas, fed by plants rooted in billion-year-old soil. You are not apart from Earth's memory. You are one of its newest thoughts. So now, gently float downward in your mind, not to fall, but to settle, like a seed in soft dirt, like dust in still air. Let the weight of time cradle you. Let the idea wrap around you like a blanket. Perhaps as we are not the first, and we will not be the last. And if that's true, it doesn't diminish us. It invites us to listen more closely, to ask kinder questions, to accept that mystery is not the absence of knowledge, but the beginning of wonder. And wonder is a perfect place to fall asleep. If you listen closely enough to silence, it begins to tell time, not in seconds or hours, but in shifts of texture, the way a riverbed smooths, the way roots coil deeper, the way stone carries weight that no longer has a name. And if you've ever held a rock in your palm, not a pebble, but one you picked up from some old cliffside or stream bank, then without realizing it, you've held a story that began before there were eyes to see it. A chapter torn from the middle of a book we've only started to read. Tonight, let's stay in that stillness. Let's move deeper into the layers, slowly, sleepily, like leaf litter becoming soil, then sandstone, then silence. Geologists, those time listeners in boots and wide hats, know that Earth doesn't shout its story. It murmurs. Its language is slow, written in pressure and mineral. One of their favorite metaphors is to imagine Earth's history as a single calendar year. The Earth forms on January 1st. Life emerges sometime around late March. The first complex animals crawl out of the ocean by mid-November. Dinosaurs arrive in December. Humans, the modern kind, don't appear until 11:58 p.m. on December 31st. Everything we've ever built, every kingdom, every structure of steel or bone, every fire and footprint, all of it happens in the last minute, in the final breath before the clock resets. We are not just recent, we are barely here. That perspective doesn't make us small, it makes us delicate. And when we ask whether there could have been someone before us, some other intelligence, some other builders, we're not really wondering about aliens or myths. We're wondering whether time could have hidden itself more completely than we imagined, whether memory is a privilege of the present. The Earth is very, very old, 4.54 billion years, give or take. For most of that time, it was inhospitable to anything you'd call civilization. It was fire and impact, frozen gases and boiling seas. But there were windows, long stretches when Earth was stable, oxygen-rich, teeming with multicellular life, ripe with climate and resources and potential. Some of these windows lasted tens of millions of years, far longer than humanity has existed. That's a long time for nothing to happen. Or is it? It's tempting to think that if a civilization had once bloomed in one of those ancient windows, let's say 300 million years ago, During the Carboniferous period, when lush forests blanketed the planet and the air was thick with oxygen, that we'd see their cities, their monuments, their machines. But we underestimate how easily Earth forgets. Consider this: most of what humans have built in the last century would not survive another 10,000 years without maintenance. Concrete crumbles, steel rusts, plastic weathers under ultraviolet light. Even skyscrapers would become mossy skeletons in less than 1,000 years. Roads buckle, tunnels flood, bridges collapse into the rivers they once crossed. And in just a few million years, the blink of a geological eye, almost nothing would remain above ground, especially if the land was later subducted beneath the tectonic plates, erased and folded into magma, then remade into mountains that remember nothing. Now imagine this: a civilization not like ours, not digital, not dependent on fossil fuels or silicon. A civilization that bloomed in a different direction, one that integrated more closely with biology, one that never mined metals in bulk, but learned to grow structures, to program with molecules, to live with minimal footprint. Their legacy would not be monuments. It might be genetic anomalies in ancient plants. It might be carbon isotopes that we misread. Or it might be gone entirely, absorbed into the breathing skin of the planet. But even if they left behind a trace, a thin signal in the deep sediment, a spike in carbon, a strange synthetic molecule now fossilized, would we notice it? Would we recognize it for what it was? Or would we dismiss it as an anomaly, a lab error, a chemical fluke from some forgotten volcano or microbial bloom? There are signs, after all, that Earth has seen strange events in the past. Geologists know them as events. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, for instance, a sudden global warming 55 million years ago with a mysterious spike in carbon. Or the mass extinction events, like the one at the end of the Permian, where 90% of species disappeared, and the cause is still debated. These moments are like smudges on an ancient painting. Could they have been caused by natural phenomena? Almost certainly. But could one or two of them, in all of Earth's vast time, have been influenced by something more, something deliberate? Science does not leap to such conclusions. It treads carefully, builds slowly, weighs every claim against layers of evidence, and rightly so. But science is also built on curiosity, on entertaining the unlikely just long enough to ask the right question. And this question, could we be the first, might be less certain than we thought. There is a word scientists use: geological signal. It means a trace that endures, something noticeable in the rocks, a layer of ash, a shift in isotope ratios, a change in fossil abundance. Our civilization is leaving a strong signal right now: plastic in sediment, artificial nitrogen in the soil, aluminum concentrations, novel radionuclides from nuclear tests. Future geologists, if they exist, will find this signal unmistakable. But now ask this: could there be older signals, ones we haven't identified, or ones we've already found but misunderstood? This is the whisper we follow, not the roar of mythology or fantasy, but the quiet, patient voice of possibility. Not proof, but pattern. Not evidence, but an invitation. And as your breathing slows and the weight of the day lifts gently off your chest, imagine Earth's crust as a library, a vast one, but poorly sorted, with pages out of order, shelves melted, stories written in a language we're only just beginning to translate. Somewhere in those stacks, perhaps, lies a chapter on someone else. Not us, not human, but aware, briefly awake, and now returned to silence. And maybe that's enough to wonder. Maybe wonder is how we keep them company. There is something humbling about holding ancient stone in your hand, not the jagged kind you'd use to build a wall, but the smooth, layered kind, pressed flat by time, mottled with the memory of pressure. It doesn't whisper its story. It doesn't offer names or numbers. It simply exists, weighty and quiet, like a thought too old for words. And if you lean your cheek against such a rock, warm from sun or cool from night, you can almost imagine the weight of years seeping into your skin. A sense that something once happened, and then unhappened, and then drifted away entirely. Earth is an artist of disappearance. While we think of it as solid and permanent, its surface is anything but. Continents float, oceans recede, mountains rise and crumble. The planet is constantly reshaping, digesting, and recycling itself. It is a world that forgets, not by accident, but by design. Beneath our feet, the crust is in motion, gliding on the pliable asthenosphere like rafts on molten syrup. Tectonic plates drift across millennia, crashing, pulling apart, curling under one another. Where they meet, whole regions of Earth are dragged downward into the mantle, melted, erased, their past returned to magma. This is called subduction, and it is how Earth eats its own stories. So even if something monumental happened 100 million years ago, a city, a network, a thriving civilization, if it was unlucky enough to rest on a plate boundary, it may already be gone, turned into volcanic gases or the components of new rock. The record we seek may not have eroded. It may have been recycled. Even without subduction, erosion plays its role. Wind, water, ice, each sculptor working with different tools, all carving away at what once stood tall. Consider the speed of decay in even the grandest ruins. Angkor Wat is swallowed by jungle in centuries. The Sphinx has lost its face in a few millennia. The rainforest reclaims roads within decades. Now imagine 10 million years, 10 million winters, 10 million floods. What remains? Perhaps only what is buried, but burial is not preservation. Not always. Organic matter decomposes, metal corrodes, wood returns to soil, even stone fractures. And if the ground shifts or sinks, if the water table rises, if the climate warms or cools dramatically, then what was preserved might collapse, mix, or transform beyond recognition. And so we realize something. Earth has no obligation to remember. It holds only what accident allows. A footprint in volcanic ash, a bone in clay, a tooth beneath a collapsed cave, the rarest things, the quietest fossils. Most life leaves no mark at all, and most of what leaves a mark is lost within a few million years. Scientists call this preservation bias, a truth both subtle and profound. The geological record is not complete. It is partial, uneven, skewed. It favors hard parts over soft, ocean life over land life, sudden deaths over gradual lives. It is not a fair archive. It is a drift of fragments, biased toward the dramatic and the lucky. Now ask yourself, if a civilization existed, a real one, technological, communicative, conscious, but lived lightly on the land, avoided metal, avoided combustion, avoided concrete, how likely is it we'd even know? Could they have gone entirely unnoticed, not because they were primitive, but because they were elegant, because they blended, because they chose not to build towers, but to code into forests, or rivers, or light itself? The absence of evidence might be less about their absence and more about our blindness, a blindness shaped by the kinds of things we expect to find. It's easy to look for bones, bricks, and bronze. But what if what we should be looking for is pattern? For gaps where something should be? For layers that feel too smooth or too disturbed or too rich in one molecule and poor in another? What if we already found traces but misunderstood them, mistook them for mineral accidents or microbial quirks? There's a kind of humility that comes with realizing how much Earth has forgotten. For all our tools and satellites and theories, we remain, in a way, archaeologists of the blind. We're digging through a shredded book where most of the pages are missing and the ink has faded from the rest. And still we try to read. Still we try to make sense of the silence. So as you rest your head tonight and let the hum of the world quiet around you, think about this. Beneath your home, beneath the street, beneath the tree you know by name, there could be, impossibly deep, unimaginably old, the dust of something that once thought, and dreamed, and built, and sang. Something whose fingerprints were wiped clean by lava, or time, or tide. Something that came and went before the continents even looked the way they do now. Not fantasy, not mythology, just a possibility. And with that possibility comes a question that rocks can't answer, but dreams can hold. Is it so strange to imagine we are not Earth's first memory, but merely its most recent echo? Imagine yourself millions of years in the future, not born into it, but merely visiting in a thought, as gently as fog rests over morning grass. The world looks different. The coastlines are not where they used to be. Mountains have moved, rivers re-threaded themselves through valleys that didn't exist in your time. But you're standing on what used to be a city. You don't know that yet. The trees are older than names. There is no ruin here, no broken spires or rusted bridges, only forest, soil rich with centuries of silence. You kneel and sift the dirt through your fingers. Somewhere in it, perhaps meters down, lie the sediments of what we once were, and the question floats quietly, like pollen on air. Would you be able to tell that someone had once lived here the way we do now? This is the question that animates a curious branch of science. Not speculation, not science fiction, but a real line of inquiry known as the Silurian Hypothesis. Coined by Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank, it asks simply, could we detect an industrial civilization in the geological record if it had existed millions of years before us? And the answer, softly, unsettlingly, is maybe not. It's not as easy as finding a city frozen in time or machines entombed in ice. Earth's surface changes, not quickly by our standards, but with inexorable grace. Over a few million years, coastlines vanish, deserts shift, and even the most carefully constructed monument is reduced to gravel, then to dust, then to something untraceable. So the hunt for past civilizations does not begin with structures. It begins with signals. What does our own civilization leave behind? Not stories, not stone, but chemical signatures, isotopic anomalies, elevated carbon dioxide levels, unnatural concentrations of nitrogen from fertilizers, plastic polymers that didn't exist 100 years ago, now quietly settling into sediment. The traces of nuclear testing, radionuclides embedded in the soil, aluminum levels far above natural baselines. These are not monuments. They are markers, layers in the earth that will stand out for those who know how to read them. a subtle geological stutter, a blink in deep time. The Earth's crust keeps records, but it keeps them like a hoarder who piles notes into drawers and pockets and caves. We are just beginning to open those drawers, and some of what we've found raises questions. There are strange events in Earth's history, geological events that seem sudden, sharp, global. One such event occurred about 55 million years ago, known as the Paleocene Eocene thermal maximum. In that moment, geologically speaking, the planet's temperature spiked. Carbon levels rose drastically, ecosystems changed, species migrated, the oceans acidified. It all lasted for around 200,000 years, then faded. The cause? Theories abound: volcanic activity, methane clathrate releases, orbital shifts. But could it just maybe have been industrial? Could it have been someone else's Anthropocene? Schmidt and Frank do not claim there was another civilization, but they ask us to think differently, to consider how little would remain of our own after millions of years, and how easily it might be missed or misinterpreted by future scientists, even armed with our best techniques. If we look backward with the same lens, what might we have overlooked? Consider how we find civilizations now: ruins, pottery shards, bones. But that's because most of our archaeology operates within the Holocene, the last 10,000 years. Our cities, our artifacts, our empires, they're all young. We've never had to look for something truly ancient, industrial, and erased by 50 million years of erosion, tectonics, and change. If such a thing existed, we would not find its monuments. We would look instead for geological fingerprints, and perhaps we have. Perhaps those fingerprints are scattered in sediments, a sudden enrichment of certain metals, an unexplained absence of biodiversity, an atmospheric hiccup written in gas bubbles trapped in ancient polar ice. But here's the problem. Even with the Silurian hypothesis in hand, we are still learning to see, to trace, to ask the right questions. The absence of direct evidence for an earlier civilization doesn't mean it didn't exist. It means only that its memory was poorly kept, not out of malice or mystery, but because Earth does not care to archive the present for the distant future. Imagine if everything we've built were gone, if all digital memory evaporated, all books burned, all buildings swallowed. What would remain of us in 10 million years? Not statues or servers, but perhaps a thin gray line in sediment, a subtle carbon pulse, a molecular anomaly. Now ask, is there such a line already? Have we already found it and simply mistaken it for volcanic activity or sudden climate change or the dance of tectonic plates? The questions do not demand answers tonight. They only ask that we be open to wonder, that we accept that our knowledge is not complete and our reach backward is short. The Silurian hypothesis does not propose science fiction. It proposes scientific humility, a willingness to admit that deep time might conceal more than we imagined. As you lie still now, limbs soft with sleep, mind gently adrift, picture the Earth's memory not as a scroll or a timeline, but as a slowly rotating kaleidoscope. Every twist changes the view. Some patterns return, some vanish forever, and some, the most beautiful, the most fragile, appear only once, then fade. Maybe we are one of those patterns, or maybe we are not the first. Fossils are fragile miracles, not in their structure, which is often hard as stone, but in their odds of existing at all. We think of Earth's history as populated by bones beneath our feet, dinosaur teeth, ammonite spirals, trilobites curled like commas in ancient slate. But those remains are the rarest of all possibilities. Most life that has ever existed is gone without a trace. No fossil, no print, no echo. Just the soft breath of biology returned to the soil, taken up again by root and rain. Fossilization is not a promise, it's a lottery. For something to become a fossil, the circumstances must align with uncanny precision. The organism must die in a place that favors preservation, in mud, in fine sediment, beneath ash or silt. It must be quickly buried, shielded from scavengers and decay. Then it must survive compression, mineralization, time. It must avoid erosion, tectonics, acid, weather, and countless forces of disruption. And even if all that succeeds, it must then be found by someone trained to recognize its story and read its shape. All this just to leave behind a whisper of presence. It's estimated that less than 1/10 of 1% of all species that ever lived are represented in the fossil record. That means the vast course of Earth's life, its full ancient bloom, is almost entirely lost. This is not error. This is nature. Earth is not a library. It is a river. It keeps few pages. It turns most into sediment and then into silence. Now imagine that within this narrow window of fossilization, you are searching not for bones or shells, but for tools, for signs of intelligence, for objects not shaped by biology but by mind. The odds shrink even further. Intelligent species, as far as we know, have always been rare. Tool-making species, rarer still, and those tools, if organic, would decay. If metallic, they would corrode. If digital, they would vanish like morning mist. A bone becomes fossil. A circuit board becomes dust. So when we ask if there could have been a civilization before ours, we are not just asking whether it left us messages. We are asking whether the Earth ever had a chance to record them, and whether we, short-lived and narrow in perception, would know where to look. What we often forget is that most of Earth's surface is not land. It is ocean. Deep, cold, slowly accumulating sediments on the abyssal plain, a place less disturbed than any terrestrial landscape. These underwater expanses are among the best record keepers we have. Each layer of silt settles like a page, compacted over time into a book without text, but full of signals. Tiny shells of plankton, chemical residues, pollen grains, atmospheric fingerprints. If there were a time capsule on Earth, it might be at the bottom of the sea. But how often do we look there deeply, with the right questions in mind? Most ocean drilling cores go back a few tens of millions of years. But even these reveal interruptions, sharp transitions in chemistry, abrupt shifts in carbon content, fossil discontinuities. Some of these are attributed to known events, asteroid impacts, volcanic cataclysms, ice age pulses. Others remain puzzling, brief, strange signals, blips in the long, smooth song of sedimentation. We do not claim these are evidence, but we must ask, could a prior civilization have left behind a signal we're misreading? Something so subtle, so buried, so different from our own that it sits in plain sight unrecognized? Or have such signals simply been lost, erased by time's patient cleaning? There's a strange comfort in this idea that to vanish so completely is not failure, but the natural state of things. That even greatness, even complexity, can return to soil, to sand, to silence without tragedy. If another civilization came before us, its disappearance would not have been a cataclysm. It would have been a settling, a slow unbuilding, like a wave returning to the ocean. And there is beauty in imagining a world that forgets, not in cruelty, but in kindness. Earth is not cold, it simply renews. It gives, reclaims, gives again. Memory to a planet is measured in chemistry, in crust, in cycles, not in monuments. Perhaps the most enduring trace of any civilization is not its tools, but its effect on the climate, its reshaping of the biosphere. Our own industrial age is leaving such a trace. The warming of air and ocean, the acidifying of seas, the rapid extinction of species, the synthetic molecules that never existed before us. These changes, even if we disappeared tomorrow, will echo for tens of thousands of years, longer in some sediments. But what if others came before and left the same sort of echo, a warming event, a spike in rare molecules, a shift in soil chemistry, but on a scale we haven't been trained to read as technological? Would we have the humility to ask if it meant something, or would we explain it away as natural because we expect no alternatives? There is no arrogance in science greater than the assumption that we are the first. There is no humility more profound than entertaining the thought that we are one of many. And tonight, as your breath evens out and your thoughts soften like stones smoothed by rain, you might let go of the need for certainty. You might rest in the gentle idea that much has passed and much has been lost, not because it was unworthy, but because forgetting is part of how Earth moves forward. Perhaps 1 billion years from now, someone else will ask the same question about us, and perhaps they too will find no clear answer, only a whisper in the rock. Close your eyes and imagine a city, not the kind you know, not steel and glass and humming wires, but something different. Picture a city made of living material, walls grown from thick veined leaves, translucent and breathing, walkways braided from the roots of trees, arching gently across streams of warm, mineral-rich water. Buildings not constructed, but coaxed, shaped from the bones of the earth like a gardener trains vines. Light filtered not through windows, but through soft tissue that responds to the sun, shifting its tint to match the mood of the day. This is a civilization that has learned to collaborate with its environment, not to conquer it. Now imagine what it would leave behind. Not concrete, not steel, not plastic, no towering obelisks, no landfills, no deep mines. Its tools are biodegradable. Its architecture is compostable. Its footprints are designed to disappear. And when its people vanish, they do so like leaves in autumn, slowly, beautifully, without resistance. This is not fantasy. It is a thought experiment, a way to stretch the edges of our assumptions. When we think of lost civilizations, we instinctively imagine versions of ourselves, stone carvers, metal shapers, fire users. But life, intelligence, and culture are not bound to our paths. What if, long before us, Earth gave rise to minds that chose a different way? What if their sophistication lay not in what they built, but in what they avoided? Our technologies are visible because they're inefficient. Energy leaks as heat. Structures demand constant maintenance. We leave traces because our tools fight nature, rusting, decaying, resistant erosion until they finally succumb. But what if technology evolved in harmony with decay? A tool that returns itself to the soil once used. A dwelling that wilts when abandoned. a network of communication rooted in mycelium beneath the surface, impossible to distinguish from the forest itself. Would such a civilization be detectable? Would we even know where to begin looking? Consider this. Intelligence is not synonymous with technology, and technology is not synonymous with industry. We live in an era that equates advancement with visibility, cities from satellites, signals across stars. But this is a projection, a mirror. Intelligence might instead express itself in subtlety, in integration, in leaving no mark. There are organisms today that already embody this idea. Fungi that communicate across vast distances through underground networks, trees that warn each other of predators by releasing airborne signals, ant colonies that regulate temperature with architectural precision, termites that engineer airflow systems in towering mounds. None of these creatures build skyscrapers, but their intelligence is no less elegant. Now scale this up. Imagine a species that evolved not only with intelligence, but with ecological empathy so deep that its cultural values discouraged permanence. That saw survival not in what endures, but in what regenerates. Their technologies might be bioengineered plants, symbiotic microbial colonies, sound-based construction, nothing to fossilize, nothing to rust, only echoes in the chemistry of ancient soils. It would be easy to miss. Even now, we struggle to detect ancient human settlements buried just a few meters underground. It often takes satellite imaging or radar to locate long-forgotten cities swallowed by jungle or sand. And those are cities made of stone. The idea that we might find a civilization that purposefully avoided permanence, that lived and died in the rhythm of the seasons, is daunting. And yet, isn't that the deeper form of wisdom? Not to dominate your environment, but to become part of it, to dissolve gracefully when your time is done? Such civilizations may have existed, not once but many times, short-lived perhaps, or spanning millennia in delicate balance. Their passing would not be marked by catastrophe or collapse, but by quiet fading. Their memory not preserved in ruins, but in the slight genetic oddities of surviving plants, or in the mineral residues of ancient lake beds. And we, modern humans, looking back with our limited tools and our concrete-bound imagination, might walk right over the graves of such cultures without ever realizing it. Sometimes, in archaeology, there's a concept called a ghost feature, the outline of a structure no longer present, visible only through subtle changes in soil coloration or crop growth. It's a clue that something once existed, something shaped the land, and then disappeared. Perhaps the entire planet holds such ghost features, not just on the surface, but deep in its chemical and biological record. Perhaps 100 million years ago, there were systems of culture and knowledge that never needed writing because memory was shared biologically, that never needed roads because their territories shifted with the stars, that never needed fire because their world was lit differently. It's hard to imagine and easy to dismiss. But so is every idea that steps outside our narrow frame of reference. It wasn't long ago that we believed humans were the only animals with language, or that cities required metal, or that progress had only one direction, ours. But the earth is older than our frameworks, older than our categories. And perhaps, in its vast quiet history, it fostered intelligences that made different choices. Tonight, as you lie in stillness, try not to picture machines or monoliths when you think of lost civilizations. Picture instead a grove of trees that once flickered with gentle light, responding to footsteps. Picture a river that once hummed with meaning. Picture a garden that tended itself for 1,000 years until it no longer needed to. And then ask yourself, what does it mean to leave no trace? Is it disappearance or perfection? If you've ever walked beside a slow river in early morning fog, you may have noticed the quiet layers of silt along the edge, soft, undisturbed, each ripple a record of yesterday's current. And if you were to scoop a handful, careful not to stir it too violently, you'd find a world of delicate sediment, grains of sand that once stood as mountains, specks of ash from long cooled fires, flecks of life long dissolved into dust. It settles, always settles, pressing itself into soft chapters, and over time it hardens and transforms, becomes history. Earth's memory doesn't shout. It settles like this in sediment. Sediment cores, long cylinders extracted from ocean floors or lake beds, are perhaps the closest thing we have to a time machine. Each layer represents a thin slice of the past. What was in the air, what flowed through the rivers, what bloomed and died in the sea. And within these layers are signals, not words, not images, but chemical and isotopic whispers. Ratios of carbon, traces of metals, pollen grains from vanished plants. A journal, not written with ink, but with the quiet insistence of gravity and time. When we talk about finding evidence of past civilizations, we imagine artifacts. But what if the only record they left was this? A thin, altered band in a sediment core, a brief change in carbon isotopes, an unusual abundance of a rare element, a molecular pattern too precise to be natural, yet too faded to decode. These are not clues you stumble across. They are patterns you must be trained to hear, and even then, interpretation is fragile. A sudden spike in carbon dioxide might mean a massive volcanic eruption. A strange isotopic ratio might suggest an asteroid impact. But what if, just once, it wasn't nature that caused the signal? What if it was someone? Let's drift for a moment through one such mystery, the Carboniferous period, roughly 300 million years ago. It was an age of lush forests, dense with ferns and towering horsetails. The air was thick with oxygen. Life flourished wildly. Then, suddenly, something shifted. There are layers of coal and black shale that suggest widespread die-offs, oxygen crashes, and a sharp cooling of the planet. The causes remain debated: glaciations, shifts in sea level, even methane releases. But what if some of these disturbances had a different origin? Not random, but reactive. Not geological, but technological. It's only a question. But questions, like sediment, settle deep when asked gently. Or consider the PETM, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, already whispered about in the darkness of previous parts. It left behind a signal unmistakable to modern geologists, a sharp, sudden rise in global temperature, ocean acidification, a redistribution of life across the globe. And yet, the cause is elusive, natural methane, some say. But the profile of change, its shape, its pacing, is eerily reminiscent of what we're doing to the planet now. Could that be coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps an echo. When you think about ancient signals like these, it helps to let go of the idea that they'll ever say in clear letters, "We were here." Instead, you must listen for disruptions in the rhythm. Not the melody, but the moment the tempo changes. A civilization, after all, leaves more than buildings. It leaves imbalance, chemical noise, elemental rearrangement. What would we leave if we vanished today? Our plastics, certainly. Microplastics have already begun to settle into the geological record, forming what some scientists now call plastiglomerates, fused plastic and stone that will persist for tens of thousands of years. Our nitrogen from synthetic fertilizers has permanently altered the composition of soil across the globe. Our carbon emissions will leave behind a fingerprint in the air and ocean, preserved in tiny bubbles of ice and buried in marine sediment. And there are the radionuclides, traces of nuclear detonations, a signature that can't be explained by volcanoes or comets. This is what future geologists might notice: the shift, the spike, the sudden bloom of artificiality in the record. So now, turn that gaze backward. Imagine someone else, not human, leaving behind their own signal. Brief, but detectable. And imagine us, about millions of years later, finding it. What would we say? Would we even recognize it as deliberate? Or would we, in our confidence, explain it away? We know so little, and yet we crave neat stories. We fill gaps with certainty. But science, at its most beautiful, is not certainty. It is curiosity trained by discipline. It is the willingness to notice the improbable and to hold it gently without conclusion. Perhaps we've already found such signals. Perhaps in some forgotten paper, in the footnote of a core analysis, there's a spike or a dip or a shimmer of data that doesn't quite fit. Perhaps it was dismissed, logged as anomaly, set aside, waiting. Perhaps somewhere beneath the floor of a quiet sea lies a layer rich with signs we don't yet know how to read. The last breath of a civilization before it dissolved, not into ash or ruin, but into chemistry. As your body softens against the quiet around you and the weight of waking lifts like mist, allow yourself this image: a hand, ungloved and curious, lowering a core sample onto a lab bench. The scientist bends close. Dust shifts. A reading flickers on a screen. Something doesn't align. Something suggests an interruption, a signal. Faint, ancient, but not random. And just before you drift fully into sleep, you might wonder, what if they were asking the same thing about us? The ocean has always had a hush to it, even when restless. There is something about its vastness that makes sound feel smaller, as if words dissolve before they travel. And beneath the surface, layer by layer, the light thins, color fades, motion slows, and temperature drops until the sea becomes something else entirely. Not just water, but a vault of time. Not empty, but patiently full. At the bottom of that darkness, where no sunlight has ever reached, lies a world almost untouched. Not by life, for life exists even here, clinging to thermal vents and grazing on the snow of dead plankton, but untouched by disturbance. Here, sediment falls with glacial slowness, millimeter by millimeter, grain by grain, year after invisible year. The seafloor is the quietest archivist Earth has ever known, and it is here, in the abyssal plains, that the most faithful memory of Earth resides. Unlike continents, which shift and crash and consume their own skin, the deep ocean is still. No cities, no farming, no footsteps, only silt settling through the weight of time. The same silt that may have recorded the fall of species, the bloom of algae, the smoke of volcanoes, the whisper of an ancient industry long lost. When scientists pull cores from these sediments, long, slender tubes of layered history, they are holding in their gloved hands slices of time far beyond human ancestry. The topmost layers might speak of the last ice age. Deeper down, a sharp line of iridium tells the story of a giant asteroid and the end of the dinosaurs. And further still, subtler changes. A shift in oxygen isotopes, a sudden bloom of a particular microfossil, a thinning of calcite shells due to acidified water. This is not storytelling as we know it. These are not ruins or relics. They are interruptions in chemistry, fluctuations, patterns, a signal that something changed, not how or why, only that it did. Now imagine if an ancient civilization had ever existed, truly ancient, one that left no towering statues or buried temples, only atmospheric disturbances, altered carbon ratios, trace molecules that do not occur in nature. This is where its traces might still remain. On the deep sea floor, unbothered by rain or earthquake, undisturbed by boots or wheels, preserved not because we tried, but because the ocean is slow and forgets nothing quickly. But there's a problem. The deep sea is difficult to reach. Most of it remains unmapped. We've explored more of the surface of Mars than the ocean floor. Core samples are limited, expensive, sparse. The holes we drill into that ancient silence are narrow, scattered, and often focused on known events. Extinction boundaries, climate transitions, periods of specific interest. We do not drill with open wonder. We drill with hypotheses. And when something doesn't match, we flag it, footnote it, file it. Rarely do we return to ask, what if this anomaly isn't just noise? What if it's signal? There are layers in some cores that defy easy explanation. Carbon isotope spikes that arrive too fast. Metal enrichments not obviously tied to volcanic activity. Abrupt changes in sediment color or grain. Often, they're dismissed as natural variation, and many probably are. Earth is complex, its systems intertwined, chaotic in ways we still struggle to predict. But what if, just once, one of those layers marked a moment when someone else rose, briefly, into awareness? Not aliens, not myths, just another species, born of this earth, who discovered energy, altered their world, and then vanished. And perhaps they didn't build cities at all. Perhaps they farmed the ocean, harnessed currents, or lived in lattice-like reef structures that collapsed back into the ecology when abandoned. Perhaps their waste was not like ours. Perhaps their plastics dissolved, their metals biodegraded. Their presence was real, but not durable in the ways we expect. And perhaps all that remains is a strange fingerprint in the chemistry of deep-sea mud. You may wonder, how could intelligence of such scale simply vanish? But ask instead, how could it remain? We assume intelligence leads to permanence, but permanence is unnatural. Earth is built to recycle. Even now, our strongest concrete will erode. Our deepest bunkers will corrode. Our signals, our broadcasts, will fade into background noise. We fight entropy, always, but entropy wins, slowly, gently, inevitably. So maybe somewhere below the Mariana Trench or the South Pacific Gyre lies a sediment core that holds the echo of a time we never knew. Maybe it has already been drilled. Maybe the scientist who examined it noticed something odd, a spike, a gap, a shimmer of data that refused categorization, and marked it with a question, only to be buried in archives like the layers it described. And maybe that question is still waiting. Like the ocean, it waits without impatience. As you drift deeper into your pillow now, feel the weight of the sea, not as fear, but as comfort. A pressure that holds memory close. A darkness not of absence, but of stillness, Somewhere down there, in the folds of the deep, lies Earth's slow heart, beating with tides, cradling ancient stories not yet translated. And perhaps, someday, we'll learn how to listen to it properly. Time doesn't erase things with drama, it does so with tenderness, not in one sweeping gesture, but through a series of soft hands: wind, water, freeze, thaw, seed, root. It unravels the most enduring of human intentions with a kind of patient grace, not out of cruelty, but as part of its nature. And when we imagine a past civilization, ancient, advanced, perhaps even self aware in ways we've never imagined, we often ask how it ended. But perhaps that's the wrong question. Perhaps it didn't end. Perhaps it dissolved. We're conditioned to think of collapse in terms of fire and fall, towers crumbling, skies darkening, a sudden silence after a long noise. But not every story breaks that way. Some fade, like heat from cooling metal. Some vanish the way a forest floor forgets a footprint. So imagine for a moment a civilization that lived on Earth tens of millions of years ago. Not a mirror of ours, not with cars and glass and highways, but with knowledge, yes, networks, culture, intention. Perhaps they harvested solar energy through biochemical processes more efficient than anything we've invented. Perhaps they grew their infrastructure organically, shaping it from living matter, woven into their ecosystems rather than layered over them. And then imagine a shift, not a war, not a comet, just a slow, irreversible change, a climatic drift, a magnetic reversal, a rising ocean, centimeter by centimeter. Technology strained not by scarcity, but by subtle instability. Feedback loops tightening, seasons becoming less reliable, ecosystems wobbling. It doesn't take a firestorm to challenge a civilization. Sometimes, all it takes is the slow betrayal of balance. Faced with this, perhaps they tried to adapt, retreated inland, redrew their networks, downsized. But maybe their systems, however advanced, were not immune to collapse when the ecological thread unraveled. They could not restart the forests, they could not cool the oceans. And so, piece by piece, their presence dimmed, not with screams, but with silence. We often forget how much of what we call civilization is held together by continuity. Roads maintained, power lines repaired, data servers cooled, water pumped. Once that rhythm breaks, even briefly the decay begins. Metal rusts, concrete cracks, food chains fray. In 100 years, cities become ruins. In 10,000, ruins become hills. In 1,000,000, hills become stone. Even the most defiant symbols of power melt before that scale of time. Consider metal, strong, unyielding. Yet every exposed metal corrodes. Copper turns green, iron to red dust. Even alloys break down when buried in wet, acidic soil. Given enough time, even buried infrastructure dissolves completely into mineral traces, indistinguishable from their surroundings. And glass, though durable, eventually devitrifies, slowly losing its structure, becoming cloudy, fragile. Plastics might persist longer, but they too are susceptible to ultraviolet light, oxidation, microbial digestion, especially over spans of millions of years, where continents shift, mountains grind upward, oceans open and close. Perhaps they built machines, machines beyond our comprehension. But machines, even magical ones, leave little legacy if not maintained. Moving parts seize, circuits corrode, batteries leak. Over geological time, even the most intricate device becomes a handful of unremarkable elements. Now consider a satellite. a symbol of technological mastery. Left in orbit, it would continue circling the Earth for a time, but orbits decay. Atmospheric drag pulls even the highest machines slowly downward. Re-entry heat vaporizes structure. What falls to Earth is either consumed in flame or shattered into traceable debris. But in a million years, even the remains of satellites become indistinguishable from the background of natural metal. So if a civilization once existed, and if it died not in drama, but in exhaustion, what would remain? Perhaps a few scattered isotopes, perhaps an unusual layer of rare elements in one outcrop, perhaps a single molecule that resists classification. Not ruins, not fossils, just faint chemical irregularities we might already have found, but never thought to question. It's tempting to think that intelligence guarantees survival, that knowledge defends against decay, but that is an illusion born of short time scales. Intelligence does not protect against entropy. It does not exempt one from time. Even the wisest of civilizations might find themselves undone, not by arrogance, but by indifference, not from within, but from the slow turning of the planet itself. And maybe they left no monuments because they didn't value permanence. Maybe they didn't believe that legacy was made of stone or story. Maybe they understood that to live well was to leave lightly, to disappear not in fire, but in bloom, to allow the planet to forget and forgive. So as you lie there now, under the quiet ceiling of the night, think of the earth not as a cradle of progress, but as a sea of stories, most of them unread. Think of civilizations not as exceptions, but as cycles. Think of the possibility that someone came before us, loved this world, built things we will never understand, and then, simply, were no longer here. And if that happened, if it happened more than once, then perhaps we too are just part of the pattern. And perhaps that's not frightening. Perhaps it's beautiful. Every culture has its stories. Some are painted on cave walls, some carved into stone, some whispered from mouth to mouth, like a flame passed from one candle to the next. And though these stories, some are shaped by place and language, many of them seem to echo one another. They speak of a world that was lost, a time before time, a people before people, civilizations swallowed by water, cities that shone and fell, knowledge that disappeared as suddenly as it came. These are not scientific claims. They are myths. But myths are not lies. They are vessels. They carry memory, emotion, longing. They preserve impressions too large or too strange to capture in pure fact. And sometimes, just sometimes, they might carry the shadow of something real. Consider Atlantis. The name conjures images of gleaming towers beneath the sea, a culture advanced and strange, lost to a single cataclysm. It entered the Western imagination through Plato, who said it was a tale passed down from Egyptian priests, a civilization beyond the pillars of Hercules, powerful, wealthy, and arrogant, and then, one day, gone. Historians have long debated the story's intent, a parable about hubris, a reflection of natural disasters, a borrowing from older memories. And yet, it endures, not because it's provable, but because it feels familiar. It rings with something deeply human, the sense that we are not the first to rise and not the first to fall. And it's not just Atlantis. Cultures around the world speak of lost lands and drowned kingdoms. In Hindu texts, there is a mention of Dwaraka, a city said to have sunk beneath the sea. In Mesopotamian tablets, The Eridu describes a great flood sent to erase humankind. The Popol Vuh of the Maya recalls cycles of creation and destruction, worlds born, undone, and born again. In Australian Aboriginal tradition, there are stories of landscapes swallowed by water, passed down orally for over 10,000 years, stories that align with post-glacial sea level rise. These myths may not describe literal civilizations with machines and monuments, but they suggest a collective memory of upheaval, of change so vast it broke the rhythm of everyday life. And some of these memories stretch back further than written history. They ride the current of songlines, proverbs, rituals, like fossils of the imagination, formed under pressure, then handed forward. What if some of these stories are not simply allegories, but distorted recollections of real events? Not of gods and giants, but of something once understood and then forgotten? It's possible, not probable, not provable, but possible. The human mind is not just a receiver of information, it is a sculptor. It shapes, it protects. When civilizations collapse, what often survives is not the archive, but the story. Paper burns, stone erodes. But the grandmother's tale, the temple chant, the child's lullaby, these endure. Transformed, yes, embellished, but alive. And stories, even when they bend the truth, sometimes curve around a deeper center. Scientists have begun to explore this terrain cautiously. Geoarchaeologists compare mythological flood stories to the timing of post-ice age sea level rise. Linguists trace words across continents, wondering how far back shared language can stretch. Memory researchers study how traumatic events embed themselves generationally, not just in narrative, but in behavior, in silence, in dream. Even in our modern world, we carry impressions of things we've never known. Why do so many cultures intuitively build pyramids? Why does the idea of a golden age, a fall, a rebirth appear again and again? Why does the motif of light beneath water, cities submerged but glowing, appear from Japan to Ireland? There may be no answer. There may be only resonance. But perhaps that's enough. Perhaps part of asking whether we are the first civilization is learning to listen not just to stone and sediment, but to the stories that refuse to die. To accept that memory is layered like the earth itself. Some memories are sharp, the way lava cools into glass. Others are soft, like peat. And some are buried so deep that they return only in dreams. You don't need to believe the myths to respect them. You don't need to prove Atlantis to wonder whether its emotional truth still matters. Because even if no physical Atlantis ever existed, the longing it represents, the yearning to touch a lost wisdom, is as real as any artifact. And perhaps that longing exists because something once was, something vast, something gone. So as you rest now, your thoughts drifting like small boats over ancient waters. Imagine this: a child, thousands of years ago, listening to a grandparent's tale beside a fire. The story is old. The stars are the same. The child asks, did those people really exist? And the grandparent, wise with silence, simply smiles. Maybe we are them. And now you drift. Beneath the soft sediment, beyond the reach of myth, past even the oldest fossils, lies a realm where Earth keeps its oldest secrets, not in ink, not in language, but in the architecture of atoms. Minerals, those quiet geometries of the underground, are Earth's earliest historians. They form in response to heat, to pressure, to chemistry. They encode time not in symbols, but in structure. Hold a zircon crystal up to the light. It's small, easily overlooked, a grain, a shard, but inside it may be a story 4.3 billion years old, older than oceans, older than plate tectonics, older even than the moon's settled face. Scientists use these tiny timekeepers to tell us when the crust cooled, when water first touched stone, when life might have had a foothold. They contain uranium, and through radioactive decay, they track time like a metronome too slow for song, but perfect for stone. This is not the past in poetry. This is the past in physics. Geologists are not treasure hunters. They are readers of the invisible. They look at crystals, inclusions, the orientation of grains, and from these they pull meaning. A slight twist in a layer suggests compression. A change in crystal size reveals cooling rate. A trace element tells of magma's chemistry. Each mineral is shaped not by chance, but by the precise conditions of its birth. And those conditions, once understood, tell us about the world as it was, down to its temperature, its chemistry, its quiet catastrophes. So if a civilization had once left behind more than myth, if it had truly altered the planet, not just biologically, but geologically, the rocks might remember. Not in ruins, not in ruins, but in signals. For example, aluminum. On Earth, aluminum is common but rarely found in its metallic form. Extracting it requires significant energy, making its abundance in refined form a potential technosignature. If we find unexpected concentrations of elemental aluminum in ancient layers, especially without corresponding natural processes, we might pause, not because it's proof, but because it's odd. Or consider synthetic molecules, things like persistent organic pollutants or halogenated compounds. These don't occur naturally. They're products of industry, and once released, they can persist in sediment for millennia. We're just now learning to detect them in modern sediments. But what if they existed in ancient cores, mistaken for contamination or anomaly? And then there are isotopes, ratios between different forms of an element. Industrial activity changes these ratios in measurable ways. Burning fossil fuels, for example, shifts the balance of carbon-12 and carbon-13. Nuclear activity leaves behind cesium and plutonium in patterns nature doesn't replicate. These are fingerprints. Light, partial, delicate, but fingerprints nonetheless. The challenge is interpretation. Earth has many processes: volcanoes, wildfires, asteroid impacts. Each leaves signals that can mimic or obscure technological activity. The line between natural and artificial is narrow, especially across millions of years. And science, rightfully, demands caution. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But perhaps what's missing is not evidence, but perspective. For decades, we searched for civilizations in the stars. We listened for radio waves. We scanned for exoplanets. We imagined monoliths, Dyson spheres, beacons. But maybe, just maybe, the first alien intelligence we discover won't be from another planet at all. Maybe it will be from here, from Earth, just buried, forgotten. Not alien in origin, but alien in time. And maybe its signal is already in our hands. A strange crystal sample on a dusty shelf. A mineral signature we can't quite explain. A ratio that doesn't fit the expected profile. Marked, reviewed, filed away. Waiting for someone to ask the right question. In this way, geology becomes not just a science of the earth, but of possibility. Every rock you see, every cliff face, every polished stone on a museum shelf, all of them are pages in a book so large, Most of us have never thought to read it, but it is there, patient, heavy, layered. The earth remembers, but it does not tell its stories freely. You must learn its language, the tongue with no verbs, no nouns, only transitions. You must understand that pressure is a word, that temperature is syntax, that alignment is rhythm. Tonight, as your breath falls into the soft cadence of sleep, imagine that somewhere deep in the crust, miles beneath the surface, in a region no light has touched for tens of millions of years, there sits a crystal, smooth, contained, untouched since its birth. Inside it, trapped in the structure like a frozen exhale, is a secret. Perhaps just a change in isotope, perhaps a molecule that doesn't belong. Nothing anyone would notice unless they knew exactly where to look. It has waited, quietly, through ice ages, through shifting continents, through extinctions and storms. It doesn't ask to be found. It only offers itself to those who know how to ask. And perhaps one day, someone will. There's something about air that feels like nothing, a presence we don't notice until it moves. A breeze against your cheek, a chill in the lungs, the sound it carries when it wraps around branches or mouths. Yet the atmosphere is not empty. It is full, full of memory, full of motion, full of breath. Every moment it is changing, and every change is a kind of inscription, a mark in time, even if it vanishes before we think to read it. The air we breathe today is ancient, not in its molecules, which swirl and recycle constantly, but in its composition. For over 2 billion years, oxygen has existed here in quantity, thanks to the slow labor of photosynthetic life. Carbon dioxide levels have risen and fallen, shaping epochs. Methane has bloomed and withered, and in the balance of these gases has always been a signal of the world's state, its heat, its ice, its flourishing, or its fading. Scientists can read this history not in the air itself, but in how that air was trapped, in the bubbles preserved inside polar ice cores. Each core, drilled from the depths of glaciers, contains tiny time capsules of atmosphere. Each layer, a winter, a spring, a decade, a century. And inside those bubbles, still compressed, still waiting, is air that dinosaurs once breathed. Air from before pyramids, before mammals, before memory. We can measure those samples. We can see how carbon levels shifted during warm periods. We can observe the trace gases released by volcanic eruptions, forest fires, the slow respirations of the biosphere. And as we grow more precise, we find fingerprints in these compositions, spikes, anomalies, dips, all suggesting that something changed, and changed quickly. Some of these anomalies are well understood. Others, not so much. One of the great markers of our current civilization is the rise in carbon dioxide and methane levels. Since the Industrial Revolution, atmospheric carbon has surged, breaking levels unseen in millions of years. We've burned carbon drawn from deep underground, fossil fuels, the compressed history of ancient forests and plankton, and returned it to the sky. That return leaves a distinct isotopic ratio, a decline in carbon-13 relative to carbon-12 due to the fossil origin of the carbon. If this trend were preserved in ice or sediment, and it will be, a future observer could read it like a flare in the sky, a sudden breath, unnatural in timing and composition, a moment where the planet exhaled something foreign. Now turn that gaze backward. Could such a breath have been exhaled before? Is there a spike, millions of years ago, that bears the same signature, one that came not from volcanoes or methane clathrates, but from combustion, from industry? There are contenders. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum again comes to mind, a rapid warming event some 55 million years ago. The isotopic record shows a sharp decrease in carbon 13, just like today, suggesting a massive release of light carbon into the atmosphere. Most likely, this came from methane hydrates. But the scale and speed are striking. The warming lasted for over 100,000 years, altering ecosystems, acidifying oceans, forcing mammals to migrate poleward. It was, in many ways, a preview of what we may be facing now. What if it was also a memory? No one claims this definitively, but the signal is there, enigmatic and sharp, and even if it is entirely natural, it reminds us that the air carries stories, that every breath Earth takes leaves a trace. And so, we come to the idea that a past civilization, one that burned, built, perhaps even flew, might be readable in the sky, not in structures, but in shifts, not in ruins, but in ratios. They may have used energy, and that use may have released gases. They may have altered the climate, intentionally or not. They may have manufactured molecules that never existed before, halocarbons, perfluorinated compounds, and those may have drifted upward, where they stayed, chemically inert, persistent, waiting to be noticed. The air forgets nothing. It is the breath of the biosphere, and in that breath are the sighs of all who have come before. We now know how to detect even parts per trillion of certain gases. We know how to analyze the composition of ancient air trapped in ice. But do we know how to interpret it without bias, without assuming that intelligence only looks like us, and therefore only leaves our kinds of traces? There could be a signal right now, frozen in some Greenland core, labeled and stored, patiently waiting for a question that no one has asked. A question that begins not with, "What is this anomaly?" but "Who left it?" And maybe we'll never know for sure. Maybe their signal was too gentle or too brief. Maybe their industries were too small to leave anything permanent. Maybe their atmosphere, like their memory, was meant to heal. But as your eyes soften now and your thoughts begin to scatter like seeds in a breeze, let this thought drift with you. Every breath you take is mingled with the breath of all things, past, present, and perhaps forgotten. The same molecules pass through trees, oceans, lungs, and clouds. The air is a chorus, ongoing, unbroken, and somewhere in that chorus there may still be a note sung long ago by someone we no longer remember. There is a particular kind of silence in the stars, not the absence of sound, but the absence of reply. We've been listening for decades. Arrays of radio telescopes stretch their dishes toward distant galaxies. Algorithms sift through static for patterns. Messages have been sent, signals monitored, sky maps annotated with hopeful coordinates. And still, the void hums with indifference. This silence is called the Fermi paradox. If life is so likely, if the universe is so vast and old, then where is everyone? It's a question that turns outward at first, to exoplanets, to extraterrestrial life, to the statistical likelihood of intelligence elsewhere. But eventually, like a long echo folding inward, it turns back to us. Not with fear, but with reflection. If civilizations do arise and vanish and leave so little behind, could we be looking at the pattern in the wrong direction? Could the first vanished civilization we find be the one beneath our feet? The stars give us scale. They show us just how old the universe truly is. over 13 billion years. Earth has only existed for a third of that time. Life has existed here for nearly 4 billion years. Intelligent life, human life, for less than a million. And technological civilization, barely a few thousand. We are young, but Earth is not. And if planets like Earth are common, and life, as chemistry suggests, is inevitable, then the logical extension is that civilizations like ours, or entirely unlike ours, should have arisen countless times, not just across the galaxy, but here, on Earth, in the vast expanse of pre-human time. And so we look upward, wondering, do stars remember? Do they archive the rise and fall of those who once watched them? In a way, yes. In the language of light, stars tell us what passes between them. We use spectroscopy to read the starlight, splitting it into its component colors to detect the fingerprint of elements: hydrogen, helium, carbon, oxygen. Each leaves its mark. And if something artificial passed before that star, a satellite, a massive structure, a ring of debris, it too might alter the light in measurable ways. In this sense, we can scan for technosignatures, not just radio signals, but the waste heat of giant machines, the strange light patterns of planetary engineering, the spectral hints of artificial compounds and atmospheres. And yet, we've found nothing, no signatures, no anomalies that can't be explained, no signs of civilizations shaping their planets into mirrors or blanketing their suns in energy harvesting shells. We find no cosmic footprints, just the slow turning of stars and the quiet birth of light. It's possible we're alone, or that we're first, but it's also possible that civilizations don't last long enough to become visible on a cosmic scale, that they bloom briefly, use what they need, and either fall inward or blend so perfectly into their world that no signal escapes. That they come and go in the thin slice of time between geological chapters. It brings us back to Earth. If advanced civilizations are fleeting, subtle, or ecologically integrated, then even on our own planet we might miss them. They might leave no radio waves, no massive structures, no planetary scars. Only the softest of signals, chemical, isotopic, mythic, buried not in orbit, but in stone. And there's another possibility, that some civilizations turn inward, that as they grow wiser, they stop broadcasting, stop building upward, and instead deepen. They learn to live within planetary limits. They stop leaving traces, not because they collapse, but because they learn not to overstep. In that vision, a civilization becomes invisible, not through destruction, but through harmony. If such a civilization once existed here, long before us, it might never have looked outward. It might have explored not space, but the ocean, not the stars, but the mind. It might have turned its brilliance toward the refinement of life itself, integrating thought into biology, communication into forest, memory into reef. No telescopes, no towers, no radio waves, only breath and balance and eventual disappearance. And if that's the case, then we are not alone. We are repeating. Our telescopes, our satellites, our glowing cities might be just one more flare in the night. Brief, beautiful, destined, like all light, to fade. This is not a mournful idea. It is humbling. It asks us to consider the real nature of legacy. Is it what endures in space, or what harmonizes with home? Is it in sending messages to stars, or in learning to live so lightly that no message is needed because no harm was done? Tonight, as your thoughts begin to drift like satellites in slow orbit, consider this. The sky above you is not empty. It is full of light, some from stars already gone, some still on their way. It is full of questions, and perhaps full of stories we've not yet learned to read. And maybe, just maybe, the answer to the Fermi paradox has been beneath our feet this whole time, not in the silence of the cosmos, but in the quiet of our own forgotten past. Intelligence wears many shapes, and not all of them are familiar. We think we know what it looks like: a city pulsing with light, wires beneath concrete, voices carried through glass. But these are the artifacts of a particular path, ours. A path shaped by opposable thumbs, fire, metal, the need to shelter from weather and fear. It is easy, then, to mistake our reflection for a standard, to believe that intelligence must build, must broadcast, must leave a mark. But what if it doesn't? What if it learns not to leave marks? There is a softness in certain forms of knowing, a kind of intelligence that moves beneath the surface, quiet, decentralized, rooted. Consider the fungal networks beneath a forest floor, mycelium threads stretching for miles, exchanging nutrients, warnings, resources. A communication network without a single voice, but rich in information. When one tree is attacked, others know. When drought comes, water is shared. Or the octopus, a creature with 3 hearts, blue blood, and a nervous system not centered in its brain, but distributed through its limbs. Each arm capable of independent action, memory, decision. Its intelligence is embodied, fluid, fleeting. It leaves behind no tools, no fire pits, no burial grounds. Yet it solves puzzles, remembers faces, dreams. These are not half-formed minds. They are complete in themselves, evolved for different circumstances, different needs. They remind us that intelligence is not a ladder, but a tree, branching in all directions. And somewhere on that tree, perhaps long ago, there grew a kind of intelligence that did not climb, but rooted. Not one that shouted, but one that listened. Imagine a civilization not centered in cities, but dispersed like the neural net of a coral reef. A society whose infrastructure was biological, homes grown like fruit, tools excreted by bacteria, light drawn from phosphorescence. Communication not through sound, but through chemical pulses or shared electric fields. Perhaps they didn't invent language as we know it. Perhaps they composed smells, harmonized color, resonated through vibration. To us, it would seem invisible, alien, even though it rose from the same earth. And perhaps they didn't need books, because memory was distributed, not stored on shelves, but passed through symbiosis, one organism holding the history of another, each generation inheriting knowledge directly, bypassing the fragility of language. A culture that never wrote, never carved, never archived, because it never needed to. If such a civilization existed, how would we know? We wouldn't find temples or statues. We wouldn't detect satellites or metals. We wouldn't discover artifacts. Instead, we might find subtle shifts in the genetic code of plants, optimized photosynthesis beyond what random mutation would suggest. We might find complex symbiotic relationships between species that shouldn't naturally co-evolve. We might find biochemical signatures in ancient soils, molecules that don't serve metabolic functions but resemble information storage. We might overlook it entirely, and perhaps we already have. Biologists have uncovered genetic puzzles, sequences with no known function, complex regulatory systems whose origin seems oddly abrupt, viruses that behave less like invaders and more like messengers. Some of these may have natural explanations, others still wait. But our tools are built to look for bones and bricks, not for intention in mycelium, not for memory in algae, not for language in scent. Intelligence, we often assume, wants to expand, to build, stop to become visible. But what if true intelligence matures into stillness? What if the highest form of advancement is not expansion, but integration? A civilization that reaches this state might choose not to grow louder, but quieter. It might become indistinguishable from the ecosystem that birthed it, not out of regression, but transcendence. Technology that merges so deeply with biology, it leaves no separate trace. Cities that photosynthesize, tools that decompose, networks that behave like rivers, and when such a civilization ends, not through collapse but through natural conclusion, it doesn't leave behind a ruin. It leaves behind a forest, a reef, a balance. We would walk through its legacy and see only a wilderness. There is something deeply humbling in this idea that the greatest minds may not be the ones who build the tallest structures, but the ones who disappear the most gracefully. That intelligence might not measure itself in monuments, but in how little damage it does. That the goal is not to be remembered, but to leave nothing behind but the conditions for life to continue. So tonight, as your mind curls like a fern into stillness, imagine that we are not alone in our intelligence, not even alone in time. Imagine others came before us, not as conquerors, not as builders, but as integrators. They sang with the wind, wrote with roots, and let go when it was time. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest civilizations are those that cannot be found, not because they didn't exist, but because they learned how not to be lost. There are parts of Earth's history where the rock simply stops speaking. No fossils, no clear layers, no transitions to guide the hand of the geologist, no signals to reassure the scientist that time has passed in ways we understand. These are not small gaps, like missing pages in a book. They are vast, eras, entire epics, measured not in centuries, but in tens of millions of years, and they sit like darkened halls in an otherwise illuminated museum, stretches of silence surrounded by noise. We call these the unconformities, and they are everywhere. An unconformity is a break in the geological record. It happens when erosion outpaces deposition, when the land forgets to keep track, when sediment is stripped instead of laid down. It can be caused by tectonic uplift, by sea level fall, by the shifting priorities of a changing Earth. A billion years may pass between two adjacent layers, with no record in between. And when we look at such a gap, we must admit we don't know what happened here, and if anything did happen, it is gone. The most famous of this is the Great Unconformity, a boundary visible in canyons and cliff faces around the world, where ancient crystalline basement rock is overlain abruptly by much younger sedimentary layers. Sometimes a billion years are missing. A billion years, erased not with a catastrophe, but with wind and time and forgetting. A billion years. Enough time for continents to rearrange, for mountain ranges to rise and vanish, for entire biospheres to bloom and fail. And yet, in the rock, it is a blank. This kind of silence is different from ignorance. Ignorance is what we don't know. Silence is what the earth refuses to show. What if somewhere in those billion-year gaps, something rose, something intelligent, something organized, something strange. We have no evidence, we say. But of course we don't. There is no evidence of anything from those times. And that's the point. These are hollow eras, empty pages, not because nothing was written, but because everything that was written has been washed away. Even now, there are layers of the earth we cannot access, basins too deep, rocks too altered by heat and pressure, places where the record, if it ever existed, has been folded, baked, compressed beyond interpretation. It's as if time itself pressed its thumb too hard and smudged the ink beyond legibility. And perhaps that's what time does, not maliciously, but as a matter of course. 1 billion years is not long for a planet. It is enough for oceans to come and go, for climates to flip from steam to ice, for the crust to wrinkle, then smooth again. If an earlier civilization arose during one of these long silences, it would not need to vanish violently to disappear. It would only need to be old. Even in our modern age, a city abandoned can be hidden by jungle in a century. In 10,000 years, nature reclaims everything. In 1 million, even the bones are gone. In 100 million, the land itself is gone. In 1 billion, even the continent it stood on may no longer exist. So perhaps the earth has had other moments like this, moments of intelligence, of culture, of awareness, followed not by catastrophe, but by erasure, slow, steady, soft erasure. And we, reading backwards through stone and chemical memory, are simply holding a book where every few chapters are missing. Perhaps they were ripped out. Perhaps they were never written. Or perhaps they were made of pages too fine to survive. There are even gaps within our own evolutionary story, whole branches of early life known only from fragments, complex organisms that appear in one layer, fully formed, only to vanish without transition in the next. We find sudden bursts of complexity, the Cambrian explosion, for example, that seem to come from nowhere. We find extinction events that happen faster than we can fully explain. The record is patchy, uneven, unreliable. We fill it with hypotheses. But underneath, there is always uncertainty. And within that uncertainty, possibility lives. We must be careful here. Possibility is not proof, but it is a space we must allow. Science does not fear mystery. It sharpens itself against it. And in that sharpening, we are reminded that what we call a lack of evidence is sometimes just a lack of preservation. We assume the past is knowable, but much of it is not. Not because we are unskilled, but because the medium itself, the earth, is imperfect. It is an editor. It revises. It abrades. It composts. And so, as you rest now, your body softening into the quiet shape of night, consider the earth not as a book with a clear beginning and end, but as a collection of whispered fragments, some loud, some faint, some so old they've become indistinguishable from silence. And in that silence, who can say what once moved, once thought, once loved? Perhaps the hollow eras of earth are not empty. Perhaps they are full, not with answers, but with the space to dream. We live surrounded by what feels permanent. Roads stretch across continents. Towers pierce the sky. Satellites drift in neat orbits above our heads, beeping quietly through the cold dark. Our voices can cross oceans in the space of a breath, and we leave behind photographs, files, films, billions of them, encoded in plastic, glass, and fragile drives, spinning somewhere beneath blinking lights. It feels as though we are here, truly here, deeply rooted, undeniable, but we are not as permanent as we believe. Our cities are young. Most are younger than the oldest trees that still grow quietly in their shadow. The entire sweep of our history, the empires, the revolutions, the centuries of invention, could be written on the skin of a single geological layer so thin it would vanish under a fingernail. And even that would take luck to preserve. Now picture a world without us, not after disaster, but after stillness, after time, after absence. The cities crumble first. Concrete cracks under frost and root. Glass falls, breaks, turns to sand again. Metals corrode, wires dissolve, plastics fragment into dust. In a few thousand years, all that stands on the surface would be gone, broken, buried, or folded back into the soil by moss, wind, flood. The forests return as they always do, not quickly, not all at once, but inevitably. Underground, subway tunnels, and basements may linger longer, but even they fill. Water seeps, ceilings collapse. Life returns, fungal, microbial, insect, and eats what remains. Steel supports become rusted ribs in the ground. In 10,000 years, all that remains might be a strange smoothness in the soil, a subtle discoloration, a puzzle to a future digger, if they dig. And far below that, beneath our footprints, beneath our ruins, the earth continues to write. It presses new layers. It folds old ones. It makes stone from sediment, erases with tectonic breath. And if a future geologist, 1 million or 10 million years from now, were to read the record, what would they find of us? They might see the plastic, thin films compacted into new minerals, plastiglomerates, our legacy baked into stone, or the isotopic signature of our emissions, the sharp decline in carbon-13, the rise in methane, the sudden chemical noise of industry. They might see artificial nitrogen in soils spreading far beyond any natural pattern, or perhaps a layer enriched in rare earth elements, used today in electronics and wind turbines and screen coatings. Or they might find the radioactive signals, the cesium and plutonium from nuclear tests in the mid-20th century, so distinct they will echo through strata for tens of thousands of years. A flash of silence and fire captured in atomic ratios. But these are faint, easy to miss, easy to misread. Will they think us a natural phenomenon, a brief warming event, a strange bloom in the chemical cycle? Will they see our mark as intentional or accidental? Will they even guess that minds once moved behind the data, minds that built art, sang songs, loved one another beneath the same sky? Maybe not. Maybe we will become just another anomaly, a gray line in the rock. And maybe that's what has already happened before. If another civilization existed long ago, perhaps this is how it ended. Not in flames, not in a single cataclysm, but in drift, in forgetting. Their mark too faint to detect, or ours too coarse to recognize it. And now we live as the echo of something already faded, already folded into the planet's deep breath. In this way, we are both legacy and witness, because we too are capable of reading the rock. We know how to find the past, and in doing so, we begin to realize how easily time can erase the present, that our moment is not a peak, but a blink, and that Earth does not preserve what we think is important. It preserves what aligns with its own slow rhythm. Perhaps then, the question is not how long we will last, but how well we will pass. What trace will we leave? Will it be harm or healing? Will the future see a scar or a layer of stillness? Already, there are quiet choices being made. Forests planted, carbon drawn down, cities reimagined not as conquest, but as coexistence. These efforts may be small, but they are part of a different story, one not about rising, but about returning, not about being remembered, but about being kind. And as you drift into sleep now, the present softening into dream, imagine the earth a million years from now, calm, alive, its skies bright again, and somewhere someone walks across a hill once called a city. They pause, not knowing why. They pick up a stone, they turn it in their hand, and perhaps, for a moment, they feel us, not in ruins, but in resonance. We may not be found, but maybe we can still be felt. The moon does not speak, but it watches. It has no wind, no rain, no rivers to carve or oceans to erode. It does not renew itself. It does not forget. Its surface is a museum without curators, where every footprint, every scar, every motion endures. And because of that, it might be the last witness to things even Earth has let go. Each night it rises, pale, still, inevitable, circling our world with a quiet that never blinks. It sees everything, but reflects nothing back. And for most of our history, we looked up at it with awe and longing, never knowing that one day we'd send pieces of ourselves there. Now, a few flags, a handful of descent stages, and the remnants of our ambition rest in its dust. They have not moved. They will not. If no one touches them, they could stay as they are for millions of years. This makes the moon something rare, a perfect archivist. Its surface is like parchment stretched across eons, recording without judgment. Unlike Earth, it does not recycle. There are no tectonic plates to drag its crust inward, no atmosphere to grind stone into sand, no water to dissolve memory. Even micrometeorites, which pelt it constantly, do not erase its past. They only add to it, layering history in soft, gray dust. So now we must ask a strange question. If a civilization existed on Earth long before us, one capable of flight, of space travel, of escape, would the moon remember? It's not as wild a thought as it seems. We ourselves reached the moon in a single lifetime, using technologies that are now, in many ways, primitive by modern standards. If we, so newly born into science, could leave traces there within decades of taking flight, might not another species, older, longer lived, and perhaps wiser, have done the same? Even a single probe, a crashed vehicle, a fragment of an ancient relay station, any of these, if they survived, might still be there, buried shallowly beneath regolith, waiting, unnoticed, unrecognized. The moon's surface is vast. We have mapped much of it, but explored very little up close. Most missions focus on select landing sites or orbital scans. The rest remains a quiet desert, not untouched, but undisturbed. And if something unusual were found, a shard of unknown alloy, a fragment of non-natural geometry, would we even recognize it as alien, or would we assume it's one of ours, lost and miscatalogued in the ever-expanding debris of modern exploration? Already, there are curious silences, unexplained flashes observed on the lunar surface, lights recorded and debated for centuries, strange, transient phenomena that modern science has yet to fully explain. Could they be natural? Most likely. But what if they are echoes, not active technology, but passive relics, solar reflectors, radio beacons, sensors long since dead, but still occasionally catching the light just right? We do not know. And perhaps that's the most compelling part of this journey, the vastness of our unknowing. The moon, small as it is a landscape of questions, and every crater might be a story. There's another layer to this. If an ancient civilization once lived here and knew, as we now know, that Earth forgets, that tectonics erase, that time reshapes, might they have chosen the moon on purpose, not just as a place to visit, but as a vault for messages, for warnings, for memory? We ourselves have begun to think this way. A few modern missions have left messages meant to last, etched discs containing human languages, digital archives of civilization, gold-plated plaques with etched drawings of who we are. These are gestures, hopeful and humble, attempts to say we were here, attempts to be remembered even if everything else fails. But what if someone else did the same? What if there is a message already waiting? It may not be written in a language we recognize. It may not be a language at all. It could be a pattern, a structure, a placement of material that seems too ordered to be chance. And if it exists, it might be buried or broken or overlooked, not because it's hidden, but because we have never thought to look at it through that lens. In this way, the moon becomes more than a satellite. It becomes a mirror, not just for light, but for imagination, for possibility, for the quiet question that maybe, just maybe, someone else once stood beneath our stars, wondering how not to be forgotten. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and the moon hangs motionless above a sleeping Earth, picture it not as distant, but as near, as a companion, as a quiet librarian of the solar system, cradling memories we've yet to retrieve, holding secrets we've forgotten how to ask. It will still be there tomorrow, and a million tomorrows after that, still circling, still watching, still waiting. Forgetting is not the absence of memory. It is the reshaping of it. A memory does not vanish when we forget. It becomes something else, a scent we can't quite name, a feeling without context, a hesitation before a familiar door. Even in the human mind, forgetting is not destruction. It is reorganization. The neurons don't burn. They rearrange, they quiet, they sync. And so, what if Earth forgets in the same way? Not by erasing, but by softening, by moving the old memories out of sight beneath layers of silt and heat and time. Not with malice, but with rhythm. The planet like a body, always in motion, always healing, always editing. We treat the absence of evidence as silence, but perhaps it's not silence, just a different kind of song. One played in a key too low, too slow, too vast for us to recognize. Memory embedded in crustal folds, in the isotope ratios of ancient rocks, in the way sediment thins and thickens, like breath. We tend to think of memory as linear, a string of events, one after another, a path we can trace. But the Earth's memory is spiral, layered, recursive. It doesn't remember through sequence, but through pressure, through phase, through repetition. Every glacier is a breath in, every interglacial a breath out. Forests rise and fall, oceans flood and retreat. What we call change, Earth experiences as rhythm. And in that rhythm, there may have been others, other pulses, other awakenings, other intervals when something looked up and wondered what came before me. The challenge is not that we lack evidence. The challenge is that we expect memory to conform to our understanding of it. We expect it to be clear, clean, preserved like an exhibit behind glass. But real memory, especially geological memory, is messy. It is incomplete, fragmentary. It requires imagination to connect what is missing, and humility to admit that what is absent may be more important than what remains. There are places on Earth where the memory feels thinner, not because nothing happened there, but because too much did. Subduction zones, where continents dive beneath one another, taking with them not just rock, but history. Metamorphic belts, where heat and pressure have transformed old layers into something unrecognizable. These are places where the planet rewrites its own story. Even the ocean forgets. The floor of the sea, once thought to be the perfect record keeper, is itself not immune. The oldest seafloor is barely 200 million years old. All else has been recycled, melted, remade, and yet we still search, still drill, still extract long cylinders of sediment and pore over them like sacred scrolls, hoping to find not just the record of life, but the breath of mind. And here, perhaps, is the gentlest truth. Even if a civilization was forgotten, completely without fossil, without trace, it does not mean it did not matter. Memory is not the only measure of meaning. We are accustomed to thinking that permanence gives value, that to endure is to matter. But what if impermanence is the natural state of all intelligent life? What if the highest civilizations are not those that persist, but those that pass, gently, quietly, leaving the earth more whole than they found it? Perhaps their legacy is not in what we can recover, but in what they allowed to remain. A species that healed the soil before it vanished, that restored a balance we assumed was always there. That changed nothing we can measure, but everything we depend upon. And perhaps we are living in the gift of their forgetting, in the stability of the Holocene, in the resilience of ecosystems, in the abundance of oxygen, carbon, rainfall. Perhaps some part of our survival is not an accident, but an inheritance, left behind not in monuments, but in conditions. That thought, though unprovable, carries a kind of kindness. We often speak of legacy as what we leave behind, but legacy might also be the space we make for others to thrive, the room we leave in the narrative, the silence we allow to deepen so something new can be heard. As you drift now, eyelids heavy, breath softened, imagine the earth as a book with many hands upon it. Some wrote in bold strokes, some only whispered into the margins, some erased what they had written, not out of shame, but out of love to make room. And we, with our machines, our maps, our longing to know, we turn the pages carefully, slowly. Sometimes we think we find a signature, a shape in the data, a pause in the sediment. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's something. But always the turning matters, because the act of remembering, even when incomplete, is an act of reverence. And in that reverence, perhaps forgetting is not failure. Perhaps it is transformation, a letting go, a kindness. And maybe the earth, like all wise beings, knows that to hold everything forever is not strength, but burden. That sometimes to forget is to forgive, to release, to allow space for the next voice, the next rhythm, the next dream to rise. Time is not a straight road, it is a fog. We walk through it with our lanterns, illuminating only the nearest few steps, while the rest recedes into the gray. We think of the past as behind us, settled and fixed, but in truth it hovers, diffused, refracted, reinterpreted with each movement forward. And what we call history is only what remains visible after the fog has passed. Everything else, all that was soft, subtle, or unwilling to shout, slips gently out of reach. We often imagine time as a thief, something that takes from us moments, memories, meaning, but maybe that's not quite right. Maybe time is more like a careful librarian, quietly rearranging the shelves of the universe, placing some volumes where they can be found again, while others are tucked away in the highest corners, where only the most patient seekers ever climb. The past may not be gone, it may only be placed just out of view. And if so, then perhaps the civilizations we seek are not lost, but merely misplaced, pressed into the folds of time where our eyes no longer reach. Folded between layers of sediment, trapped in the genome of a flower, some hidden in the isotopic fingerprint of a long evaporated sea. Time does not destroy, it transforms. A forest becomes coal, a city becomes clay, a voice becomes vibration, then silence. What was once intention becomes mineral, what was once light becomes shadow. And in this transformation, things don't vanish, they change states. Meaning becomes matter, experience becomes chemistry. Time's veil is not an end, but a translation. It is how the world keeps speaking, even when no one remembers the words. Perhaps then, the reason we have not found evidence of past civilizations is not because they didn't exist, but because they moved with time differently. Their technology may have been temporal, not material. Their monuments built in rhythm, not in stone. Their records kept in the language of tides or root systems, in the seasonal blooming of a tree that now grows without context. And even we, with all our satellites or our steel, our data, are not immune to this soft reformatting. 1,000 years from now, what will remain of our digital self? Not the files, not the images, perhaps only a few scattered molecules from degraded circuitry, or a subtle change in the layering of soil. The glow of our cities will fade. The language we speak will change. The stories we tell will drift, merge, dissolve into new shapes. We will become, like all before us, a pattern within a pattern. The more we learn about the past, the more we realize how little of it survives. Entire languages have vanished, spoken for centuries, and now reduced to a single word etched in stone. Cultures whose names we do not know once shaped entire continents, their influence felt, even now, in the way rice grows, or paths wind, or songs resolve. And yet we do not know who they were. Their names are wind, their histories are absence, and yet they are not gone. They are folded into us, woven into our gestures, our food, our architecture, just as any earlier civilizations may still live within the planet itself, not as artifacts, but as tendencies, an unexplained efficiency in a plant's metabolism, an anomalous precision in a mountain's crystalline alignment, a shape repeated across cultures with no common root. We may not recognize them because they do not resemble us, but resemblance is not the same as reality. To see through time's veil, we must let go of the assumption that intelligence looks a certain way, that it requires cities, smoke, or metal. Maybe it only requires intention, balance, the ability to reflect, and perhaps to depart. Somewhere, deep in a rock's structure, or in the silence between two fossil layers, there may be a record waiting, not of failure, but of transition, not of conquest, but of completion. We may not uncover it in our lifetime, or ever, but to ask the question is to acknowledge that we are not the sole narrators of Earth's story. We are a chapter, and perhaps not the first. So as you lie still now, the rhythm of your breath matching the rhythm of distant tides, imagine the past not as behind you, but all around you, hidden in folds, layered in whispers, softened by time into something no longer visible, but still present. What if they are still here, not in body, not in ruin, but in rhythm, in resonance, in the curve of the coast, or the taste of rain, or the orbit of the moon. Perhaps the past is not gone. Perhaps it is only dreaming beneath time's gentle veil. What if this question, this soft, persistent wondering, is the only evidence we will ever find? What if the mere act of asking, of imagining someone before us, of reaching backward not with certainty but with care, is itself the faintest trace that something once was, and perhaps still is? Not a civilization exactly, but a feeling, a presence, a continuity that doesn't need fossil or metal or monument, but only this: our gaze cast gently toward the deep, and our breath that slowed in reverence. We have walked through layers of stone and time together, touched the ancient seafloor, listened for whispers in crystals, followed chemical signals through sediment and silence. We have stood before the moon and asked if it remembers. We have wondered if 1,000 forgotten cultures now bloom in the patterns of wind. But no voice answered, no artifact appeared. And still, the question lingers. That question is not weakness, it is wonder. And wonder is a form of intelligence. It is what pulls us beyond ourselves. It's what looks at a smooth stone and sees the glacier that left it. What touches a fossil and feels the warmth of the animal it once was. What hears the hush between waves and imagines a song sung 1,000,000 years ago by lips we never knew, to children we'll never meet. And maybe that is enough. Not to know, but to wonder, to sit with the possible, to allow that the world is deeper, older, stranger than we can prove, and that in this strangeness we are not alone, not in space perhaps, and not in time. What would it change really if we did find evidence? If one day a layer of rock yielded a shard of unmistakable design, a circuit etched into quartz, a perfectly engineered molecule in strata 60 million years old. Would we understand it? Would it belong to us? Would it explain anything? Or would it only deepen the mystery? And even if we never find it, hasn't the search itself already made us better? To ask who came before is to loosen the grip of ego, to remember that we are not the climax of the story, but one turning of the page. That intelligence does not belong to us alone. That wisdom may have walked this planet long before us, barefoot and silent, leaving no mark but the balance it kept with wind and water and fire. In that way, we are not just scientists, we are pilgrims, walking not toward proof, but toward humility, toward a softer understanding that some things are too large to find, that some truths are meant to be held, not solved, that some stories are told not in words, but in the echo they leave behind in the stillness. And perhaps the most ancient civilizations did not write because they trusted the planet to carry their meaning. Perhaps they didn't build towers because they knew the tallest things are trees. Perhaps they didn't leave signals because they understood that survival doesn't always need to be remembered. Sometimes it only needs to be felt, like the warmth left in a chair after someone has gone. So tonight, as you drift into the slow currents of sleep, let the question stay with you, soft, unanswered, and luminous. Let it be the quiet companion to your breath, the unseen hand that holds yours as you descend into the depths of dream. Let it be the song you don't remember learning, but somehow always knew. Perhaps we are not the first, perhaps we are only the latest dream of the earth. And if so, let us be a gentle dream. Let us be a kind one, because someday the planet may dream again, and someone may ask the same question. And even if they never find us, Let them feel that we once asked too, and that we asked with wonder.